morning, everybody, and welcome to Rose's Cafe. Today we're going to start with an exploration of baking, which I think will go for a few weeks. The first thing we're going to do this morning is bake one of my all-time favorite classics, jalapeno cheese bread. One of my favorite no-cook comfort meals after a long day is a nice big piece of jalapeno cheese bread and a glass of some full-bodied red wine to go with it. I have my list of ingredients already, and it should be enough to prepare 3 loaves. First ingredient is 8 cups of all-purpose flour. I have 7 cups already in my mixing bowl and 1 extra cup standing by in reserve. 4 cups of shredded cheddar cheese. I bought this already shredded, but if you really want to, you could grate it yourself. 3/4 of a cup of minced jalapeno peppers. A 1/2 cup of white sugar. 1½ tablespoons of salt. 2 cups of hot water. 3.25 ounce packages of active dry yeast, and 4 tablespoons of vegetable oil. The first thing we're going to want to do is get our yeast started. We'll get that going and set it aside for a few minutes while we look at the other ingredients. For the yeast, at this point, in a medium bowl, we're going to add 2 cups of warm hot water. We're going to add our 3 packages of active dry yeast. And we're going to add a tablespoon of the sugar we have measured out. And we're going to give that all a stir, and it'll take about 10 minutes for the yeast to be ready. And in the meantime, we'll work on the dry ingredients. Now, in the largest mixing bowl you've got, you should combine 7 cups of the all-purpose flour. Add your 4 cups of shredded cheese. Add the salt. The rest of the sugar. And your minced jalapeno peppers. Now you're going to mix this well by hand. Now our yeast, water, and sugar mixture has been sitting for about 10 minutes. It's clear the yeast is well dissolved and starting to activate. So it's time to move on to our next step. We're going to add the vegetable oil, and we're going to add about half of our yeast sugar water here. And we're going to mix that well by hand. Now that we have the flour and other dry ingredients moistened as much as possible, we'll add the rest of the liquid, and we're going to mix that in until we have everything thoroughly incorporated. Once all the ingredients are thoroughly incorporated, we want to turn the dough out onto a lightly floured surface. We're going to knead it until it's a nice, smooth, elastic consistency, and that will take about 15 minutes. We may add a little more flour, but only enough to keep it from sticking to the surface. Okay, now our dough has been kneaded and it's nice and elastic. I'm going to take another bowl and coat it well inside with the spray vegetable oil. And I'm going to place our dough inside the bowl, and I'm going to spray the oil on top of the dough so that the whole thing is well greased, and I'm going to cover the whole thing with a nice clean cloth. And yes, it is clean, it's got old cooking stains on it. And we're going to let that sit until the dough is about double in size, which will take about an hour. Now, an hour is a long time, so this is probably a good time to make myself a nice mocha latte. Now, I like espresso, and it's really easy to make at home if you know how. But frankly, it's an awful lot of work to go to for a cup of coffee. So I reserve making espresso for those times when I have time to do it justice and enjoy it. When I don't have the time or the energy to put into making a really good cup of espresso, I generally resort to ordinary old-fashioned American coffee for my caffeine fix. As you can see, my process is perhaps a bit casual compared to all the fuss people put around it. Cheers. But I can assure you it really tastes good. Now our dough's been rising for about an hour, and it is absolutely ready for the next step. First we're going to punch it down, just like that. You just punch it. Fold the edges back on itself. Now we're going to turn it out onto the same floured surface. This punching down gets the air out of it to make the texture more uniform. We'll do a little more kneading here. Kneading produces glutens, and that's what gives bread its nice springy texture. Now this recipe is supposed to make 3 loaves, so we're going to divide our dough roughly into 3 equal pieces. Now we have 3 roughly equal sized balls of dough. And we've made sure we've popped any bubbles inside by kneading them. And now we're going to shape each ball into a loaf. Now this recipe makes 3 loaves of bread. I love jalapeno cheese bread, but I can't eat 3 loaves in one day. So I'm going to do a couple of different things. Now I have here a couple of loaf pans and a small baking sheet. I plan to do 3 things here. 2 loaves of bread I'm going to bake today, right now, or after it's risen again. And I'm going to freeze one and eat one. For the baking sheet here, I'm going to form and freeze the dough before it rises a second time, so that when I want another loaf of bread, I have 2 options. I'll either be able to pull the fully cooked frozen one out of the freezer and let it thaw, or I'll be able to pull the dough that's frozen out of the freezer, let it thaw and rise, and then bake it. And then we can evaluate which method is the best way to preserve bread. Because baking homemade bread is quite rewarding and enjoyable, but it's very labor intensive. It would be great if you could bake a whole bunch of it at once and then be able to have it leisurely as you want it. So for the loaves we're going to bake today, we'll start by spraying our loaf pan with vegetable oil, putting a loaf of bread or a loaf of dough in the pan. We'll do that for both of them. We'll cover those with a clean cloth and set them aside to let them rise for about an hour. Now this loaf of dough we have shaped into the shape we want, and we sprayed it on all sides with some vegetable oil to keep it from sticking. And we're going to put that inside a bread bag we're going to carefully form the bottom, close up the bag, and we're going to place it on a nice flat surface inside the freezer for the first day so that it freezes in the shape we want it. An hour's up, so let's check our bread. Oh, it looks nicely risen, and I think we're ready to bake it. Now we're going to put it in an oven preheated to 325 and bake it for about an hour. And in the meantime, we need to clean up our messy table. Although it's only been about 50 minutes, I think they're done now. We'll just let these guys cool for a while and then pop them out of the pan. It's been about 15 minutes and I believe the bread's cooled off enough to remove from the pan. Oh yes, check out these perfect loaves. This one is going to get frozen so I can enjoy it later. And this one, this is my lunch. Thanks for stopping by. We'll see you next time at Rose's Cafe.